Hello everyone and welcome to a new series I call Red Hot Go, a series where I watch the first few episodes of a show that someone in my comments section has recommended. The purpose of this format is to be a quick and easy formula to follow in order to give me more time to work on bigger videos. For the very first episode, I will be giving High School Girl a Red Hot Go, an anime recommended by Bad Video Man and Miko Helen. After watching the first 3 episodes of High School Girl, I have 2 big takeaways from it. First of all, I get an overwhelming sense that whoever wrote this story is speaking from a place of genuine passion. The use of real video games stood out to me almost immediately, given how much you tend to see fictional fiction within fiction like this. But in High School Girl, real games are used, and there are even discussions on how these games work, and even some pretty obscure trivia like how certain moves in Street Fighter 2 are illegal in tournaments for being cheap. Something else that contributes to this passion is the general awfulness of the world around the main characters. Just look at the old lady running the shop, the tutor who is straight up sadistic, the classmate who looks down on the main character, or the other classmate who explicitly wants to molest him. This sends a clear message about the world of this story and how the writer must have perceived the real world in their youth. The world is kind of a terrible place, so why not escape into video games? The second big takeaway is the power that video games have to bring people together. The main character and the female lead bond over video games, even though they seemingly have nothing else in common and she doesn't even speak to him. The fact that they spend the first moments of their fair trip apart from the group to play games further plays into the games as escapism theme, especially when you consider that the other characters with them have ulterior motives. But real friendship is built from this bond that extends beyond games. The female lead experiences affair for the first time with the main character when everyone else is gone. I can see why people resonate with this show, seeing someone so passionate about a topic that casual conversation of that topic isn't enough to satisfy them. That very idea of wanting to talk about something with like-minded people was my inspiration to start making analytical content for YouTube. I don't really have anyone in my personal life that I can talk about anime or video games with, so I certainly identify with someone who finally finds another person that he can share his passion with, even if I don't identify with the elitism that he showcases on a regular basis. So now that I've given this show a red hot go, what now? Well, I'll certainly continue watching it. I liked it a lot. And I can see the show giving me enough material to talk about to make at least one video, but it would be unwise of me to promise anything along those lines at this point. This time, by request of Alex Funnycat and my Discord server in general, I will be giving Love Is War a red hot go. If the introduction is anything to go by, to our main characters, Shirogane and Shinomiya, love is war, which makes it quite different from anything else I have ever seen. The weapons they wield during the OP certainly fit the theme, even if they did surprise me the first time I saw them. Not gonna lie, I legitimately wondered if this anime was going to be like Mr. and Mrs. Smith. I must admit I was not impressed with the show early on, as it front-loaded its first episode with exposition that was all spoken as opposed to being shown. Given the last 2 shows I've analysed, I'd say my expectations for opening episodes are higher than they used to be, and this show simply does not meet that mark. However, the show does not continue this trend. Sure, it has narration, but it usually adds context to what is happening as opposed to explaining it. By the end of the first segment, I understood what draws people into this show. It's the most intense battle of wits I have seen, and the brain power that both characters expend to back the other into a corner never failed to be entertaining. There's a hint of absurdity in how far they both go to entice the other to confess, and I love it. If there is one thing I would like to see in the show going forward, it is some self-awareness as to unhealthy and ultimately destructive their view of love is. Obviously they can't have this kind of revelation too early or the show will more or less end, but when I think about moments like the one where Shirogane ponders his own advice to forego the intricate plans when asking someone out, I can't help but feel as though I'd like to see more moments like that going forward. I appreciated that the last segment of episode 3, the last episode I watched before writing this script, was dedicated to showing us more about Shinomiya, and barely touched on the central conflict of the show. It also showed us her internalized feeling of isolation by, well, what do you know, showing us her memories instead of telling us that she was lonely. If only the first part of episode 1 were more like this. If this segment is a promise that we'll get to learn more about the characters, that will make me very happy. So when I'm done with the Red Hot Go video, what happens to the show it's based on? Well, if I like it, I'll finish it. If I don't like it, I'll drop it. And if I'm not sure, I'll give it some more time. As for the fate of Love is War, I will certainly finish it. Besides the first chunk of episode 1, the show has been a blast, and I look forward to seeing how this war continues. Let me get this out of the way from the start. No, I have never watched Pokemon. The only Pokemon game I've ever played is Pokemon Go for iOS, and my knowledge of the series is minuscule. So when 2K55 suggested that I give it a red hot go, I figured, why not? Let's check out the show that took my generation by storm and introduced millions of Westerners into the world of anime. So here is what I have to say after giving Pokemon a red hot go. First of all, I must commend the creators of Pokemon for making early episodes free to watch on their website. That's really going above and beyond for old fans and newcomers like myself. I've heard that Pokemon the anime was based on Pokemon the game for Game Boy, and I can barely imagine the excitement of a child who was so used to the black and white Game Boy pixel art, getting to see what Pokemon looked like in hand-drawn colourful animation. The first shot, which depicts a Game Boy-like Pokemon battle expanding in scope to a full-blown arena, is a brilliant way to draw people into this universe. Starting with visuals your audience should be familiar with, and contextualizing it within the world of the anime. One of the first things that stood out to me was just how clunky the animation could get. However, I am not one of those killjoys who will lambast a show for not having modern visuals. Rather, I see the limited animation as quite charming, and I can't help but believe that most kids this show was created for would easily have let their own imaginations fill in the gaps. Thanks to the YouTube channel Extra Credits, one of the things I did know about the anime going in was that it was written to be as accurate to the game's mechanics as possible. And even as someone who hasn't played Pokemon, I can kind of see how this show would have left me with some pointers for the game. With our protagonist, Ash, setting out on his own at age 10, making friends and collecting what are essentially pets, I can see why this series resonated with so many young fans, as it would have presented them with a character their age attaining the adult-like agency that so many kids long for. Also, it almost goes without saying that the Pokemon are all very cute. Episode 3 has this scene where Pikachu and Caterpie look up at the moon and have an exaggerated conversation in a language that we don't understand, and it was adorable. Pokemon are essentially animals, so it makes sense that seeing them exhibit human-like traits would endear us to them even further. All in all, the first 3 episodes of Pokemon were an absolute blast, which is why it pains me to say that I will not be continuing to watch it. Now, I estimate that throughout this series, 9 out of 10 times when I drop a show, it will be because I did not like it, or it failed to engage me. However, Pokemon is one of those rare 1 in 10 cases where I actually liked it a lot, but I just can't wrap my head around how much more there is to see. At time of writing, there are 1,110 episodes of Pokemon, and that doesn't even include the 23 movies or God knows how many side stories. That is not a commitment I can make at this time, but if I ever attain immortality and need something to mull me over for a few decades, I'll be sure to pick it back up again. This week, by recommendation of Fireclaw and Slurp, I will be giving Rascal Does Not Dream of a Bunny Girl Senpai a red hot go. And I'm sorry to say that if I didn't have to watch the first 3 episodes for red hot go, I would have dropped it after episode 1. The show begins with an intriguing premise. I mean, the mysterious journal and the mysterious bunny girl that only our main character can see, that's pretty intriguing. But everything else just drags it down. The dull, uninspired, unemotional deliveries from all the characters. The little sister nonsense, which isn't a huge part of the show, but is still there. And as I went on, I realised that the plot could be downright incomprehensible. There's a moment in episode 2 where Mai suddenly brings up that they're still in a fight from episode 1. But this is after the first chunk of episode 2 where they went shopping together and seemed to be absolutely fine. It's almost like they brought this argument up out of nowhere just to artificially raise tension. And this happens all the time. Conflict will just pop up out of nowhere with no rhyme or reason. Now I will admit the "do you know what time it is" gag from episode 2 was actually pretty funny, and the mysteries that this show sets up are pretty interesting, but unfortunately that is just not enough for me to get past how bland and uninteresting the characters are. The main character in particular strikes me as this too cool for school kind of character, the kind of character that's meant to appeal for teenagers who believe they are the same way. And let me just say, there's nothing wrong with that. If you're a teenager and you think the main character in this show is the coolest dude ever, that's fine. But you have to understand that I am in my mid-20s. I've long stopped thinking that the I don't care attitude is anything more than a vain attempt at looking cool. He has his moments sprinkled throughout the show, sure, but again, it's just not enough to make up for the lack of interest I have in everything else. So it's probably no surprise to any of you that I will be dropping this show. The mysteries are intriguing and the main character had these very rare moments where he was actually pretty funny, but all in all, the show just could not maintain my interest. This time, by request of my wonderful patron Jaman5 as well as Superloop13, Grim and Duncan Bones, I will be giving Hyouka a red hot go. First thing I thought when watching Hyouka was, oh great, another too cool for school protagonist. But I eventually wasn't bothered by his attitude, as 1, he was given a cast of interesting characters to bounce off of, and 2, no one seems to think that Hotaro is cool for his energy-conserving attitude. In fact, he is more often than not being derided for this attitude, or being encouraged to forego it altogether. By the end of the 3rd episode, we get told what the ultimate mystery is, what the show will be spent figuring out. Eru here wants to remember what her uncle said to her a long time ago. And I must admit, as far as show-spanning mysteries go, this one is rather weak. I'm not really invested in what her uncle said to her, despite how cute her design is and how sad she becomes when she talks about it. Eru herself is fine. I like the way she looks at a mystery the same way I look at a plate of roast pork, and her catchphrase, "I'm curious," does a great job at reinforcing the show's main draw, but more on that later. The other characters are also fine. I'm interested to see how Ibara will deal with crushing on a guy who knows about her crush and clearly doesn't care about it, and I'm endeared by Satoshi and his overly energetic persona, as it makes a nice contrast to Hotaro's tired and uninvolved personality. While their dynamic is fun, the characters themselves aren't quite enough to hook me onto the show either. The fact is, so many shows rely on their characters or a main mystery to invest its viewers, but as I have said, Hyouka doesn't hook me in either regard. But in the end, it doesn't need to. The thing that kept me interested enough to happily watch through the first 3 episodes in a single sitting was its individual mysteries that cropped up each episode. I'm a sucker for a good mystery, and Hyouka's individual bite-sized questions had me hooked. Keep in mind, I went into Hyouka blind, so I had no idea it was a mystery show until Eru begged Hotaro to help her figure out how she got locked in the classroom, and it became abundantly clear that the show was not going to let this go. Immediately, I remember the scene where Hotaro first went to the classroom and passed a maintenance worker on the way, and I immediately thought that he must have locked the door, and I wound up being right. This is the kind of mystery storytelling that I love, the kind that gives you all the pieces you need to solve the mystery by yourself, and has the main characters explain the solution in a way that those who didn't notice all the pieces can easily follow along with. In fact, over the course of the first 3 episodes, for each mystery I was at a different level of having worked it out. Like I said earlier, for the locked door mystery, I guessed the solution and got to feel clever when I was reaffirmed. For the book mystery, I had my own theory that turned out to be wrong, but learning how I had put the pieces together incorrectly was satisfying in its own way. The defensive 3rd year mystery was one that had me completely stumped. I had no idea what Hotaro was doing until he explained it at the end of the episode, which led to a facepalm how did I miss that kind of moment. But that in and of itself carried its own sense of joy, that a puzzle had been laid out before me without my knowledge, and I got to see all the hidden pieces being revealed and put together. So in the end, while Hyouka misses more shots than it hits, the one hit it got was so good that it negates all the others. Now, this anime walks on a thin line. If the characters do not become more engaging as the show goes on, then my enjoyment will solely be based on the mini-mysteries, and should they diminish in quality, I will likely have no motivation to continue the series. It's for risky shows like this that I have my hitherto unused category for Red Hot Go, to be determined. This means that I will keep watching until I lose interest or finish it. This may come off as anticlimactic, but towards the end of the year I'm going to do a Red Hot Go Roundup where I tell you how I felt about the shows I watched and whether I actually finished them. This time by recommendation of Raimation Kakashi Hatake and Slurp, I will be giving My Youth Romantic Comedy Is Wrong As I Expected a red hot go. I was warned by a friendly user on my Discord that if I didn't like Bunny Girl Senpai, then I probably wouldn't like this either, and I can say that their warning was certainly appropriate. The main character, Hachiman, is about as bland and boring as the two previous protagonists that I have covered on this show. While he seems to take a more anarchistic approach to life and his dialogue can be sprinkled with moments of emotion, more often than not, he acts as though he doesn't care about what's happening around him, and this results in a monotone voice that just sounds like he can't give a stuff. The other core character, Yukino, is no better, delivering most of her dialogue in a monotone voice as well. Any scene where these two were alone and talking among themselves was dreadful. In many instances, I was begging for them to stop talking and to let the scene end. And saying that about two of the three core characters is a huge problem. This is another show that I likely would have dropped after a single episode if the format of Red Hot Go didn't dictate that I watch the first three. However, this time I'm glad I stuck around. Yui, the third core character, adds some much needed spice to the show. Yui is delightful, she wears her heart on her sleeve and just has so much fun with the other characters that you cannot help but be endeared by her. This also extends to the various students that our main characters help as part of the support club. The premise of helping a new student every episode is an interesting one that will likely keep me intrigued for a little while, much like the mysteries from Hyouka. Unlike Hyouka, however, as the story goes on, you begin to get the sense that Hachiman is a product of his environment, that his disdain for social interaction and people in general actually comes from a long history of social rejection, and that his solo attitude is being used as a barrier to prevent any further pain. And unlike other Too Cool for School protagonists, Hachiman reveals his own intentions at the very end of episode 1. When Yui gives him a homemade cookie, it looks wonky, poorly made, and serves to remind him and us about how pitiful her cooking skills are. But he scarfs it down like he hasn't eaten in years, because, in a way, he hasn't. The cookie represents a social interaction, a shared experience, a small bond with another human being. As much as he rejects society, wishes he were a bear, or wants to burn the school down, deep down he is desperately craving social interaction so much that he devours the first gesture of goodwill that he receives. So while any scene featuring only the two main characters can be downright painful to watch, any scene containing Yui or another classmate is serviceable. The humour isn't laugh out loud, but it isn't cringeworthy either. The different student every episode premise may just be enough to keep me watching for now. But yet again, this is a risky show that I will have to classify as a to be determined. If the show relies less on dialogue scenes between the two main characters, then I can maybe see myself finishing this one. But if the interactions between other classmates becomes uninteresting, then this show will get dropped like a rock. This week, by recommendation of my wonderful patron Quincy Chamberlain, I will be giving Railgun a red hot go. I'm going to start with the things I liked about the show, specifically the thing that I liked the most. All the characters are interesting. None of them deliver their lines like they are apathetic to life itself. And after the past few shows I've covered on this series, that is a breath of fresh air. That's not to say they all have good personalities. I passionately hate one of them in particular, but none of them are boring. I also quite like the idea behind this town. It sounds generic, but a mostly student-populated town where students from different schools are constantly mingling is pretty interesting. And when you add the superpower aspect, it creates a world where all kinds of interesting stories can happen. Lastly, towards the beginning of episode 1, we get some well done exposition in regards to the power of our main character, being displayed to us through visuals and not dialogue. We're also told about this leveling system that goes from 0 to 5, but at no point do they ever explain what separates a level 1 from, say, a level 2. And I'm glad they don't, because that would have been extremely annoying. Speaking of extremely annoying, I despise Kuroko. She's whiny, prone to intense fits of jealousy over nothing, and her obsession with the main character not only creates uncomfortable fan service, but cringe-worthy scenes all around. Like, am I supposed to laugh when she gropes Makoto? Or strips her against her will? Or tries to drug her? Or flash her? Or straight up stalk her with a camera? Is that supposed to be funny? Because it's not. It's creepy, uncomfortable, and more than anything else, it's just straight up annoying. Episode 2 was nothing but this dynamic, and it was the worst of the episodes I watched. Yeah, there's a similarly uncomfortable dynamic between Ruiko and Kazari, but at least Ruiko doesn't act as though she is entitled to another human being. Now, I've seen characters like Kuroko before, namely Suzanka from Kunoichi Tsubaki no Mune no Uchi, who is another character who has a crush on their mentor and or skill-based superior. Suzanka does some pretty silly things to get noticed by the main character Tsubaki, but it never develops into predatory behaviour, nor is there even really any element of lust. It's just a childish crush on a big sister figure. Kuroko, on the other hand, is clearly lusting after the main character, and it's not endearing, it's downright creepy. To a lesser extent, I was also bothered by the resolution to episode 3. There's a girl going around assaulting other girls with a stun gun and drawing crazy eyebrows on them. We learn at the end of the episode that the villain was once dumped by a boyfriend over her own bushy eyebrows, and so she swore revenge on all other eyebrows in the world. Now, if the scene had stopped there, I would be totally fine with it. But then Ruiko, one of the girls who was assaulted, mind you, tells the villain that their eyebrows aren't ugly, and the villain gets really emotional and wants to be friends with Ruiko, and... I'm sorry, are you trying to tell me that this perpetrator of assault is actually a character I'm supposed to sympathize with? Because some shallow dimwit insulted her appearance once? Because I'm not buying it. I am not going to feel sorry for someone who used a weapon against students in an impersonal manner just because someone was mean to her that one time. I know I've been rather hard on the shows that I've been covering in Red Hot Go lately, and I promise that I chose Railgun because I thought I would like it. You were the chosen one, Railgun! You were supposed to destroy the to-be-determined streak, not join it! When I watched Railgun, I spent far more time annoyed than entertained. But annoyed is still better than bored, so using my new scoring system from ice cold to red hot, I will rate this show lukewarm. I might watch 2 more episodes in case it gets better, but if it doesn't, then I likely won't be continuing. This time, by request of Kakashi Hatake, I will be giving The Promised Neverland a red hot go. Just to be clear, while I had never watched the anime, I had read enough of the manga to get the general gist of what the story would be about. But for reference, I never met Crone in the manga, so I have a feeling that I mustn't have read that far ahead. However, knowing where this show was going did give me an opportunity to see all the interesting foreshadowing in the first episode, when the show simultaneously showed us this sickly sweet and wholesome existence while sneaking in some uncomfortable imagery until the moment where the tone takes its most dramatic shift and we see where the show was going all along. Promised Neverland is essentially a prison break show, with the protagonist Emma and her friends Norman and Ray joining forces to break themselves and everyone else out of this human farm. Seeing their covert meetings discussing all the various factors that will ultimately hinder their escape takes me back to playing Sly Raccoon 2 of all things. Just the idea that they are piecing together a plan and chipping away at it piece by piece to ensure that it goes off without a hitch is just really interesting. I'm also quite interested in how this show could potentially showcase some brilliant dark storytelling. I have always felt that the difference between dark and edgy is an effort on the part of the characters. Both types of story need some level of misery, but an edgy story wallows in it while a dark story fights against it at all costs. With Emma in particular so determined to get everyone out, if she fails in any way, I'll be interested to see how she copes. However, while the darkness factor for this story is only potentially brilliant, what is already genuinely brilliant is how the show handles tension. The scene between Emma and the caretaker in particular just makes your skin crawl because you know what an awful person this caretaker is and how bad it would be for Emma to give away too much. So I watched this scene from the edge of my seat and breathed a sigh of relief when it was over. Now, I've been glad about a lot of scenes ending throughout this series, but this was the only one that I look back on positively. What really gets me excited about this show is how totally and utterly screwed these kids are. From Crone being able to capture all but 2 of them in under 20 minutes, to the weird demon race that we know nothing about and that I hope we can continue to know nothing about. Even the idea that escaping this orphanage is just step 1 is enough to get me pumped to watch more. If I had to say something negative about the show, I feel like the scene where Rei is brought into the fold could have been cut in half if some redundant dialogue was taken out. But that's not much more than a petty nitpick, and I swiftly got over it once the scene had ended. So, with an interesting and tense storyline, a big payoff being built up to, and a constant fear of what might happen to these kids, I am more than happy to give The Promised Neverland my very first red hot rating. And unless the quality of the show takes a serious dip, I can easily see myself watching this one all the way through. This time, by request of my Discord moderator 2K55 and my wonderful patron Jaman5, I will be giving Mob Psycho 100 a red hot go. At first, it appears that the premise is about this kid who's really good at fighting monsters. The opening scene shows us that fighting monsters is no easy feat, and the exorcism of the headbutt ghost shows us that spirits are common enough in this world that even obvious frauds like Reagan can make a quick buck from them. The introduction and continuation of this premise expose one of the show's most interesting strengths and one of its most disappointing flaws. The interesting strength is, of course, the style. On top of having a nice minimalist approach to character design, we occasionally switch to these beautiful hand-painted shots, and it's quite unlike anything I've ever seen. The characters' minimalist designs mean that they can become extremely expressive when needed, and some characters, like the ones from the Body Improvement Club, have these wacky over-the-top designs that stand out among the others. However, the show's most annoying weakness is the tendency to tell instead of show, which is disappointing because as early as the first exorcism, we are shown that Reagan is a scam artist without having to be told, so the showrunners clearly know how. But when we're in the tunnel, the only way it is conveyed to us that the power level of the last monster is huge is that a character explicitly tells us. They could have shown this monster's power level in several ways, like having Mob's usual attack not work at first, but instead it's just explained to us like we're 5 years old. Now, anyone who has watched Red Hot Go before will know that I have a particular disdain for bland, emotionless characters. Every show I have covered that has one, I have either disliked or liked in spite of the bland protagonist. Mob is yet another emotionless character who delivers most of their lines in a monotone voice, so I hope you can appreciate how strange it is for me to say that I absolutely love Mob, and he is absolutely my favourite part of this show. I think what makes Mob work where so many other characters don't is just how earnest he is. Unlike Hotaro, who chooses to conserve his energy, or Sakuta, who's a boring dweeb, Mob genuinely wants to enjoy life, and the level of expression he shows when he's outside of his comfort zone is amazing. While he's portrayed as an unstoppable force during fight scenes, he is incompetent in just about everything else. Which brings me to what I think this show is actually going to be about. From the ending of episode 1, I got the sense that this story was actually about Mob and his social development, making friends, building confidence, and making strides to becoming a better person. When I think about how this story could hypothetically play out, it gets me really excited to watch Mob grow as a person, and maybe even come to realise his self-worth enough to ditch Reagan, the cheapskate bastard. So while the art style and general premise are interesting in their own right, it's Mob and his social development that makes me excited to keep watching and see where the story goes. So it probably isn't a surprise that from ice cold to red hot, this show gets a rating of red hot from me, and I cannot wait to watch more. This week, by recommendation of my wonderful patron Data52, as well as Slurp, Duncan Bones, Wurel and Fish Eyes, I will be giving Pet Girl of Sakurasou a red hot go. Honestly, this show is a bit of a mixed bag in terms of things I liked and disliked, so I'm going to flip-flop between them as I go. To begin, the exposition in this show is downright dreadful in the first episode. Just about any form of sloppy exposition you can think of can be found here. Ongoing narration or dialogue between friends, contrived character introductions with their own spectators. It honestly gets downright insulting how much information is directly spoken to the viewer. But possibly the worst part of this exposition is that it doesn't even get the entire message across. I feel like each character's backstories were blurted out at me, and yet I still don't know what some of their deals are. The main character of the show, Sorata, is actually pretty good. Ultimately, he has enough personality and character to not come off as a monotone slice of bread protagonist. He reacts decently to the things happening around him, and his unconditional love for cats endeared me to him right away. His characterization does somewhat suffer from the lackluster exposition, but I still can't help but root for this guy. Then we get Mashiro, and to be completely honest, Mashiro isn't a character in the first 3 episodes. She is a tool. Her first line in the show, asking Sorata what colour he is, serves to set up the overarching theme, but nothing else. She's so passive in the story that she literally doesn't even put her own shoes on, and even her backstory only serves to force Sorata to reevaluate the way he looks at life. Maybe later in the show, Mashiro will get some characterization, but for these first 3 episodes, she is the blankest blank slate character I have ever seen. I quite like Ryunosuke. The idea of a character impacting the plot who we don't get to see is kind of interesting. So far there has only been one interaction with him, but it reminded me of the kinds of conversations that I have with my own friends over Discord, so seeing that conversation in anime form was quite nice. I kind of wish that his AI maid didn't exist and that he would speak to the characters himself in those moments, but that's getting pretty nitpicky. The rest of the side characters are okay, but all of them except Nanami exacerbate my biggest pet peeve with this show. Pet Girl of Sakurasou contains a lot of moments that feature sexually explicit elements. Things like nudity, conversations about sex, gestures of affection, and all sorts of content that make the show not suitable for a younger audience. Now, any of you who have watched my channel will know that I strongly object to the sexualization of underage characters, but that isn't really what bothered me about this show. Most of what happens kind of makes sense in the way that these are a bunch of teenagers living in a home with no adequate supervision. What bothers me is that these moments are only presented for the purposes of fan service. There are no themes being explored around sexuality or nudity, or anything that could come from scenes like this. It's all meant to be ogled at and not thought on beyond fantasizing about the characters, and it just comes off as wasted potential. And creepy, right? Like, they're still kids, so this is obviously still very creepy. However, while the lack of intimate themes in a show with intimate scenes is my biggest gripe, my biggest praise for the show is the theme that it does seem to cover: passion. Every resident of Sakurasou has a talent that they dedicate their lives to, which is something you see very often in anime about young people. Even some of the biggest shows in the public consciousness, like My Hero Academia or Haikyuu, feature main characters who know exactly what they want to dedicate the rest of their lives to. But this is seldom the case for people this young. This reality is reflected in Sorata, who has no passion besides taking care of his stray cats. While I'm sure that his character arc will conclude with that passion being found, for the time being it's nice to have an anime character as old as 17, struggling with their identity and figuring out what they want to do with their life, because that is what adolescence is like for more people than anime acknowledges. So while the show is dragged down by a non-character of a female lead, clumsy exposition, and sexually explicit scenarios that ultimately say nothing, it is also held up by an endearing main character, some interesting side ones, and a main running theme that you don't get very often in modern anime. From Ice Cold to Red Hot, I give this show a rating of lukewarm. I'll keep watching it for now, but I'm not sure if I'll be finishing this one. This episode, by request of my wonderful patron Jaman5 as well as OP Lol and Fish Eyes, I will be giving Your Lie in April a red hot go. Believe it or not, my first observation for this show is the way that music is an integral part of the story. It made me think of shows like High School Girl or Yuru Camp, the way it presented a standard slice of life setting with a niche interest helping the characters relate to one another. But it became clear as the show went on that music played a far more important role in the individual lives of the two main characters. That is after episode 1 was finally over. Yeah, this is another one that I would have dropped sooner had the format for Red Hot Go not demanded that I continue. I'm glad I did stick around because there's plenty about this show that excites me, but the first episode showcases very little of it. Between clumsy exposition and overindulgence in melodrama, I swiftly found myself bored. This was remedied by what has got to be one of my favourite character introductions ever. Kaori is introduced playing music with kids in the park, and her enthusiasm playing and the excitement she gives to the kids she's playing with make her very endearing, even if that goodwill is burnt up almost immediately after. Although fair is fair, at least we as an audience weren't witness to the pervy incident this time. However, what I cannot excuse is the show's means of presenting the central conflict for the main character. We learn early on that he no longer plays the piano outside of hitting the odd key for work. We discover the reason is that his mother taught him the piano using abusive methods and died when he was still young. While I have no issues with being presented this information as early as the first episode, I do object to the scenes that try to make us feel bad for this character. We don't know him yet. We're not going to be invested in his struggle at this point, so the attempt to do so falls flat. While music is clearly a core theme of the show, the crux of the story is how Kaori and Kosei relate to music. While Kosei's backstory for distancing himself from music was poorly delivered, the backstory itself is interesting. He was clearly taught music as a discipline as opposed to a fun hobby, so it was interesting to see him interact with Kaori, someone who clearly finds a lot of joy in music, even if her talent isn't acknowledged by conventional standards. I'm in two minds about a particular aspect of the first 3 episodes. Kosei has stopped playing music because once he gets into it, he can no longer hear himself play. This seems to be some kind of effect caused by associated hatred. He hated the way his mother treated him, so he hates the piano. Thus his mind physically rejects his desire to play. It is interesting to see a character with a passion for music being held back by their own mind. What has me split is whether or not the side characters' methods of getting around this are appropriate. I'm all for tough love in certain situations, where someone needs a slight push to do something they already wanted to do. However, I'm not sure if the stalking constitutes as a little push, and Kosei is dealing with genuine trauma. This isn't like forcing an introvert to go to a party, this is more like forcing an arachnophobe into a spider tank. I have no doubt that this will work out in the end and that Kosei will rediscover his love for music and dissociate that passion from his horrible mother, but is promoting such an approach appropriate in the context of helping a real person? I just don't know. Anyway, despite doing plenty right, the show itself is still mired in melodrama and can still become dull from time to time, so from ice cold to red hot, I give this show a rating of lukewarm. I'll keep watching to see where they go with the dynamic between Kosei and Kaori, but I can't guarantee that I'll be finishing this one. This time by recommendation of my wonderful patron Data52, as well as Fish Eyes and Alex Funny Act, I will be giving Quintissential Quintuplets a red hot go. My very first thought when watching this show was, I am going to love this main character. And I was right. Futaro is introduced explaining how he gets the best deal for 200 yen at his school cafeteria, and I'll be damned if that's not the most interesting way I have ever seen a protagonist introduced. Not only do I know from that moment that he is frugal, but that he is analytical, that he puts a great deal of thought into even the most mundane aspects of his life. That is excellent characterization, and it was all done over an inner monologue about rice. In fact, there's a lot I like about Futaro. He's expressive, he puts a great deal of effort into the things he does, and he even straight up acts petty in that first scene, which was so fun to watch. However, when the OP played for the first time, I got a bad feeling. like a pit had formed in the very depths of my stomach and was eating away at all that I was. As this dread washed over my very being, 6 words echoed throughout my mind. Please don't be a harem anime. But by the time Ichika was introduced without any clothes on, I had lost all hope. Yes, this is a capital H harem anime, and it comes with all the rubbish that harem anime is usually filled to the brim with. By the end of the 3rd episode, only one of the 5 sisters has a crush on the main character. But the show begins with a framing device of Futaro reminiscing about the day he first met the woman he is getting married to, which is one of the quintuplets, so it's clearly going for a bachelor-style which one will he choose narrative. The one thing that bothers me the most is just how generic this show starts out. Each of the sisters is an archetype that you've probably seen 100 times before. They play out all the kinds of situations that you've probably seen 100 times before, and it's all played completely straight. There's a moment in episode 2 where Miku asks Futaro to meet her on the roof, and he thinks she is going to ask him out. I called out what the misunderstanding was as soon as he read the note, but the show persisted with this bait and switch as though it was some iconic master twist in the narrative. There was a hint in episode 2 that Futaro is eventually going to convince all the sisters to study by luring them in with topics they are passionate about, which would be pretty fun to watch. While he did discover Miku's passion by accident, watching him learn about the topic to use it as bribery was kind of fun. And I would love to see a show where he tries to investigate what the other sisters are interested in, or how he can make studying more engaging for them. Episode 3 drops this narrative altogether for more harem garbage, and the episode feels drawn out as a result. In the end, I can't help but have a grudging respect for Quintessential Quintuplets. It knows exactly what it wants to be, and goes for it without pretending that there's anything more to it. While I can respect such dedication to one's vision, it is not a vision that I resonate with in the slightest. From ice cold to red hot, only for the potential the show has to be interesting, I give Quintessential Quintuplets a rating of chilly. It's got 1 or 2 more episodes to hook me with its overarching premise, or I will be taking my leave. This time by request of my wonderful patrons Jaman5 and Pixcalibur, as well as Grim, Fisheyes and Alex Funny-Act, I will be giving K-On! A red hot go. Obviously, the very first thing that I as a viewer was treated to was watching Yui flail around her home, trying to get ready for school. Usually, writing wisdom warns against starting a story with a character waking up, but there's just so much character packed into this sequence that I cannot help but love it anyway. The other core cast are also interesting. At first, they seemingly fall into familiar archetypes: energetic, shy, posh, etc. But even as early as the first 3 episodes, we begin to see hints that there may be more to them. I would argue that one of the show's main draws is the implicit promise that we will learn more about this cast of characters, as Yui does. Something that surprised me is how little the early narrative has to do with music. I understand that this is an odd thing to say about a show like K-On!, but it seems as though the club they all joined could have been for anything, and the narrative could have worked with minimal changes. Now, this isn't a complaint. Actually, I'm quite fond of the idea that this is a show about a group of strangers becoming friends. In fact, none of the core cast's motivations even align with music. Ritsu starts a band because she is excited by the thought of being a rock star. Mio joins the band because Ritsu asks her to. Tsumugi joins because she thinks the rest of the cast is interesting, and Yui joins because she doesn't want the rest of her school life to go by without having done anything. Besides the odd reference, the show seemingly has little interest in exploring music as a concept for the time being, but once again, that isn't necessarily a complaint. Not only is the show more interested in showing a blossoming friendship, but it seemingly wants to tackle friendship as a core theme. Not only do we mostly see these characters eating snacks together, but in episode 2 and 3, we see them go out of their way to help one another, although this is not always executed perfectly. The best and worst examples of this come in episode 2 when Yui wants to buy a guitar. When she has her heart set on one that is outside of her price range, all the band members get jobs to help her save up. This goes to show the camaraderie between people striving for a singular goal. And then later, when they all give their pay to Yui, she turns it down, electing instead to buy something in her budget until she can afford something nicer. This creates an interesting dilemma. Does Yui inconvenience her new friends to get the guitar she wants, or does she accept that her first guitar will not be the one she really wanted? At least it was interesting until Tsumugi used her social clout to get Yui the guitar she wanted for a price within her budget. Now I understand what they were going for here. We know as early as the fast food scene that Tsumugi is fascinated by commoner culture, and she stumbled into this result by trying to haggle, something that she had only just learnt about earlier in the episode. My problem is that it was an easy solution to an otherwise compelling problem. I got a somewhat similar vibe from the end of episode 3, when Yui gets a great test score after only one night of studying. I hope that the narrative does not continue to find cop-out solutions to the problems faced by the core cast, but even if it does, there will still be plenty left to enjoy. So from ice cold to red hot, I give K-On! A rating of sizzling. It doesn't give me the level of excitement needed for a red hot rating, but if it lives up to all the potential in the first episodes, I imagine that will be changing by the end of year roundup. This time by request of my wonderful patrons Pixcalibur and Tyler Bennett, as well as Alexis Gamer, Fisheyes, David Frog, Rymation, Grim and Alex Funnyact, I will be giving Tonikawa Fly Me to the Moon a red hot go. The very first scene of the show piqued my interest. It's not every day you start a show with a protagonist who is bleeding out and believes that they are going to die. The intro even ends with an admission that the woman standing above him will be his wife someday. And I thought at the time that this was going to be a story about these two building a relationship from strangers to married, and that was exciting. I was also quickly interested by said protagonist when he introduces himself. His name is Nasa, and yes, it causes him a lot of problems in his early life. And these issues eventually lead him down a path of unbearable arrogance. And by unbearable, I mean for the people around him and not for the audience, because I quite like that he starts out as an arrogant brat. It made me excited to see how he would develop from that point. It's this arrogance that causes the accident that we saw in medias res at the start of the first episode. Nasa sees a girl that is so cute that he just has to talk to her, and he winds up being hit by a truck while approaching her. With 2 broken legs and likely a severe concussion, his arrogance is what makes him chase down the cute girl who saved him from the brunt of the collision. And this is all quite entertaining in a "this dude is thirsty" kind of way. However, it is at this point that I began to sour on the show. Nasa confesses his love for this woman who he doesn't even know the name of yet, and she goes along with it. She makes him promise to marry her, and at first I wondered if this was just a ploy to get him to calm down so that he would go to the hospital. But we learn later in the episode that she took it all very seriously, and the second time they meet, they get married. I literally yelled at the screen when the wife, Tsukasa, says that she will put her faith into Nasa. You don't know him. This premise comes with all the issues you would expect. The relationship is incredibly shallow as they don't know anything about each other, and it's almost as if the show wants to have its cake and eat it too. The way that it dives straight into marriage, but also has the usual generic teen angst thing. There's a moment in episode 2 where Nasa and Tsukasa are buying a futon, and he panics when he wonders if this is a date. Just like you've seen in 100 other anime, and as if they aren't already married. And they just had to make Tsukasa underage too. Despite Nasa being 18, we couldn't have a story about 2 adults getting married, no. How will people get their rocks off unless the side boob they're seeing belongs to a child? I mean, this isn't the worst perv pandering I've ever seen, but it certainly isn't necessary. Also, for the record, being married to someone does not mean you can kiss them while they sleep. There is no intimacy without consent. That's called sexual assault. So is there anything I like about the show? Sure. I quite like the thematic link between NASA's name and the feats of NASA the space program. According to this show, the meaning behind going to the moon was doing something that many thought to be impossible. It's a shame that the show used such a good analogy for what amounts to a shotgun wedding, other than something more thematically adventurous. I like the idea of the main couple getting together at the start of a story on paper. I mean, I love the relationship between Ayaka and Takaru from Suriduri Children, and they share about as much screen time before they get together. But in that relationship, it's made clear that there's already some history between these two, and their development going forward is dedicated to naturally advancing their relationship. working out boundaries, blundering here and there. The relationship between Nasa and Tsukasa had no history. He just proposed 5 minutes after seeing her for the first time, and when they next meet, they get married and move in together. Now, I do get the impression that there is still plenty of development to take place, that there may be a reason that Tsukasa was so keen to get married, and that we'll see these two naturally get to the point in their relationship where most couples would decide on marriage anyway. It is nice to see the cute domestic moments, like Nasa helping Tsukasa with her shopping, or Tsukasa showing Nasa that good cooking doesn't require rigorous science. But having their relationship thrown into the deep end before they even learn how to swim is a bit baffling. The last episode came with a few issues that don't bode well for the future of the show. It hints at a love triangle and plants the seeds for a generic misunderstanding that I'm sure will be wrung for every drop of drama that can be extracted. However, I am curious about the stinger. It's made me reconsider my original assumptions about Tsukasa and where she came from. While I'm on the topic of the last episode, I got some very kind messages on my Discord from people who thought I would object to episode 3. And I can see why people would say that. It is a bathhouse episode featuring a 16-year-old. But to be honest, I didn't see anything wrong here. At no point did I feel like the show was trying to pander to me or show off Tsukasa in a pervy way. Some also pointed out that I may object to Kaname peeping on Nasa, but honestly that didn't bother me either. Nasa's an adult and Kaname isn't, but she's the perpetrator of this incident. I mean, it's not an okay thing to do, but it doesn't get my blood boiling the way that underage perv pandering does. So while the domestic life scenes can be sweet and I'm curious to see where Nasa's arc may go, the show is held down by perv pandering, the baffling circumstances of the leading duo's relationship, and the heavy foreshadowing for generic teen drama. From ice cold to red hot, I give Tonikawa Over the Moon for You a rating of lukewarm. If it makes good on the promise of generic teen drama, I'll probably be dropping this one. This time, by request of my wonderful patron Quincy Chamberlain, as well as Furel, Fireclaw, George Charbel and VinVT, I will be giving Rent a Girlfriend a red hot go. I was a little worried by the title that this was going to be another harem show. However, 3 episodes in, that doesn't seem to be the case. Not yet, anyway. I was also glad to see that we were dealing with adults as opposed to young teenagers this time. It's after the absurdly quick setup that we get into the central premise of the show. Our protagonist, Kazuya, has a bad breakup and hires an escort named Chizuru to help take his mind off things. Please note that when I say escort, this is not the sexual kind, just someone who you can go on a date with for money. After going on this date and having a good time, he feels wrong for hiring someone to fill his ex's shoes. While his feeling strange about it can be narratively interesting, hiring Chizuru for a second date just to chew her out was a nasty thing to do. You can't demand a service, but then demean those who provide it. However, I didn't have long to dwell on this before Chizuru rightfully called Kazuya out for being a jerk, and then we meet her. Now, at time of writing, I've only met half the girls that show up in the OP, but I don't need to see them to know who wins the title of Best Girl in Rent a Girlfriend. That honour cannot go to anyone but Sayuri, Kazuya's grandmother, who made me laugh every time she was on screen. She's just such a kick-ass grandma. She's snarky to her kids, she's a gossip among her friends, her first question in the hospital is, does my room have Wi-Fi? And she doesn't give a damn about embarrassing her grandson. Sayuri is an absolute treasure, and I hope that she continues to be a large part of the show's narrative. Speaking of the show's narrative, it's funny that I've done this red hot go right after my Orange video essay, where I explained that media inherently makes statements about the world around it. I bring this up here because Rent a Girlfriend has set up a few plot threads that will inevitably make statements of their own, and I'm a little worried about where some of them are going. For starters, at the end of episode 1, Chizuru says that she cannot quit her escort job yet, implying that it's a temporary job. Now, there's nothing wrong with that on its own, however, her reason for working in that profession can potentially make a statement about those who do that kind of work. Say Chizuru works the job because she is desperate for money and has no other means to attain it. That would make the statement that an escort's line of work is inherently demeaning and that people only take it up as a last resort. I would disagree with that sentiment, but there are plenty of ways that the show could avoid that message. One could make the case that the show is already communicating this by Chizuru's reluctance to tell her family about her line of work, but it isn't clear yet if the show is treating her secrecy as the right or wrong thing to do. The other potentially problematic message comes with Kazuya's ex-girlfriend Mami, who the show presents as sweet and cheerful but also someone with a darker side. After discovering that Kazuya has a girlfriend, she decides that she wants to break them up, and these plans have just gone into full swing by the end of episode 3. When she first started showing hints of jealousy, I thought that the show was going the A Million Ways to Die in the West route, showing the main character that despite the breakup hurting a lot, it was for the best in the long run. However, the problem presents itself when you realise just how obsessed Mami is with breaking Kazuya and Chizuru up. This narrative device could perpetuate the often false belief that one's ex is secretly crazy and out to hurt you. I'll be interested to see where they take this narrative thread and what the show has to say about those types of rare nuclear breakups. And of course, it wouldn't be an episode of Red Hot Go without me complaining about perv pandering. But there's so little in this show, and I don't mind what little there is. As well as the characters being adults, pervy shots actually serve a narrative purpose. They help to accentuate and criticize the protagonist's lust. I haven't talked about Kazuya much in this video, but here's a protagonist who I'm eager to watch evolve into something greater than the man he was at the start. Kazuya is kind of a perv. He tries to kiss Chizuru in episode 1 and intentionally takes an opportunity to peep on his ex in episode 3. While it wasn't exactly appropriate of Mami to call out his past promiscuous behaviours in such a demeaning way, they are still flawed aspects of Kazuya's character that he needs to overcome. I hope that what little perv pandering there is will dissipate throughout the show as he becomes a better person. Of course, this is very wishful thinking. It's entirely possible that the author made him a perv specifically to justify the perv pandering, and that it will not change throughout the show. But a weary narrative analyst can dream. So considering that this is a rare story about adults, one with characters who I love and the only significant complaints I have are only hypothetical, I think from ice cold to red hot I can give Rent-A-Girlfriend a rating of boiling. Fingers crossed the introduction of the other female characters doesn't turn this into another trashy harem anime. This time, by request of Rymation, Frank Stendhal, Super Nolu, Shadowblazer 13 and Corn Nugget Boy, I will be giving Golden Time a red hot go. I went into Golden Time knowing that the author of the source material, Yuyuko Takemiya, also wrote Toradora as well, and I could certainly see some similarities between the two. On the most surface level, the female lead, Koko, strongly resembles Taiga with her long brown hair and large brown eyes. Her relationship with Mitsuo also gives me similar vibes to Ryuji and Taiga when they would argue. I basically liked all the characters from the get-go. Koko's introduction was bombastic and unexpected, Mitsuo being portrayed as just a bigger doofus as the protagonist made him endearing, and even though Linda and Shinami didn't get quite as much screen time in the first episode, I was immediately fascinated by them as well. The introduction of our protagonist, Banri, was also handled well. I particularly like the scene where his newfound friend Mitsuo is embarrassed to have a bouquet of roses. Banri's means to solve this problem showcased creativity, while his motivation showcased empathy. The end of episode 1 was a little baffling. The narrative had portrayed Banri as someone who was excited to begin their college life. However, an inner monologue suddenly brings up the prospect of falling in love, which seemingly came out of nowhere. Now, by the end of episode 3, I think I can see where they're going with this, but as a first-time viewer, it did seem somewhat jarring at the time. However, I didn't have much time to dwell on that confusion before the Tea Club comes barging into the narrative to create chaos. The scene where they drag Banri away by his ankles was incredible. The characters involved turned the dramatic performances up to 11 and it was delightfully absurd. Just like its predecessor, Golden Time seems to be exploring the theme of social isolation, notably Koko's isolation from the rest of the student body. While Toradora explored the isolation of someone who is outcast for their appearance and someone who is outcast for their behaviour, Koko is seemingly outcast for both. Her appearance and behaviour exude an unapproachable aura, as Banri discovers when he overhears several people talking her up as a beautiful girl who is out of their league, or a rich girl with whom regular people cannot relate. In an early venture to escape this isolation, Koko and Banri find themselves in a situation that some who are seeking social connection might: attempted indoctrination into a cult. Yes, I'm serious. However, this does somewhat work as Banri and Coco begin a bond with each other after escaping together. Not only do they now have a shared experience, but they take some time to chat while they're on the run. And although that conversation drags on far longer than it needs to, many parts of it are rather charming. The whole cult situation brings up the aspect of the show that confuses me the most: the premise. Usually, the shows I watch for Red Hot Go manage to explain what the story is about within the first 3 episodes. Promised Neverland, for instance, made its premise brutally clear by the end of episode 1. Love is War made its premise clear by the end of the first segment. Even Bunny Girl Senpai, a show that I did not care for, managed to set up what the show would be about in what little time I spent with it. Golden Time does not set up a straightforward premise within its first 3 episodes. The OP suggests it will be a love story, but that thought hasn't even crossed the main characters' minds by the end of episode 3. Maybe it's about solving Banri's memory loss, but he seemingly isn't interested in that. If I made a guess based solely on the events of the first 3 episodes alone, I would guess that it was about club hopping to find the right fit. But that doesn't seem likely. However, despite the lack of a straightforward premise, many of the events that have transpired and admissions made by the main characters strongly points towards the core theme: identity. Coco has a very similar problem to the one Kitamura had, albeit much worse. She is so infatuated with Mitsuo that he has become a core part of her identity. Coco quite literally says that Mitsuo is her reason for waking up in the morning. I hope that as the show continues, she, like Kitamura, will gradually decouple her identity from Mitsuo, and learn to live life for herself. Maybe we'll even get to see it happen on screen this time. Banri similarly has an identity problem. At the end of high school, he was involved in an accident that took his memories. The idea that he is a different person from who he was before the accident, that the version of himself that people knew had essentially died, is an intriguing one. Even the show's favourite running joke, the one where Coco gets Banri's name wrong, or at the very end of episode 3, when Banri gets Linda's name wrong, further shines a light onto the theme of identity. The pieces for a fantastic narrative are here, however it is not yet clear how the show will put those pieces together. So from ice cold to red hot, I give Golden Time a rating of boiling. But understand that this is a very solid boil. If the show gets any better beyond the first 3 episodes, I can easily see that rating going up. Hey guys, Big Joe here, and as you can probably tell, I'm not really in any condition to be voicing a YouTube video. But we're in luck. Everyone please thank Sammy for lending her voice to this episode of Red Hot Go.
This time, by request of my wonderful patron Lars Espen, as well as Daniel Newville, Fish Eyes, and Grim, I will be giving Charlotte a red hot go. Not going to lie, the metaphorical interlude at the beginning came off as confusing and very pretentious. I was worried that this was going to be an eye-roll fest until the first proper scene started, and frankly, I wish the show had begun with that. The first real scene was brilliant. With naught but good framing and character expression, the anime was able to wordlessly convey what had happened here. That our protagonist, you, can inhabit the bodies of others. That idea immediately got me excited. I'm a fan of body swap stories in general, so the prospect of getting to see one about a teenager who could do it intentionally was promising. It didn't take long after that to realise that I kind of hate you, but not in the same way that I hate Sakuta or Koruko. Those characters I hate because they're bland or painful to watch. You, on the other hand, is someone who I love to hate. Imagine all the worst ways one would exploit body inhibiting ability. He does all of it. He uses it to perv on girls, start fights that he won't have to finish, cheats on tests, and worst of all, engineers a life or death situation in which he can be the hero to impress a girl. On top of that, the smug sense of superiority he feels is almost suffocating. All I thought about for the most of episode 1 was that I couldn't wait for someone to come along and make him suffer. It turns out I didn't have to wait very long. By the end of episode 1, more powerful characters have forced him to attend a new school for students with unique abilities. Yu loses the girl he was pursuing, and the realization that he isn't as superior as once believed has brought him down to earth. What you discover with that beautiful beatdown is that this is something of a superhero show full of characters with unique abilities. We meet Nao, someone who can turn invisible for only single person's perspective. Her characterization is a little all over the place. Sometimes she's stern and intense, other times she's excitable and hyper. I don't know what to think about her yet. Jojo, on the other hand, is an absolute delight. His power is that he can move so quickly that it appears as teleportation, but the momentum he is left with typically flings him into buildings or through windows. The expressions he makes when using his powers and indifferent attitude towards the injuries he sustains makes him very likable. From episode 2, we get into what I believe will be the general structure of episodes going forward. Yu, Naro, and Jojo track down the other kids with unique abilities and either recruit them to school or convince them to stop using their powers. We have seen Yu possess one of these targets before, but I'd be very interested to see if this allows him to use their power as well. When a ghost named Misa possesses her little sister, Yusa, she can still use her fire power, so it is possible. All fiction about heroes tend to explore an aspect of the hero themselves or the society which they live. Charlotte appears to be focused mostly on how traditional society would exploit those with power, particularly with the portrayal of Nao's brother, someone who was experimented on to the point of insanity. Despite this not being well characterized in the first 3 episodes, Nao does have strong motivation for the things she does. You can tell that she is passionate about finding and reforming heroes because she doesn't want to see them suffer in the way her brother had to. I wanted to end 2020 with a bang, and you all delivered, with its great characters, exciting premise, and potential themes set up within the first 3 episodes. From ice cold to red hot, I gladly give Charlotte a rating of red hot. I cannot wait to watch more, and I will tell you how I went with it and every other show I've watched this year in Red Hot Go Roundup 2020.
The end of 2020 is upon us, but before we begin a whole new year, some loose ends need to be tied up, namely the shows that I watched for Red Hot Go. Throughout the year, I've tried out a new show every fortnight, and some of them went on to be favourites. So in this roundup, I will be going through every piece of media that I did an episode of Red Hot Go for, and tell you how I went with it after the episode aired. Please note that I will not be spoiling any of these shows, although I will speak vaguely about what the narrative achieves following the first 3 episodes. With that out of the way, let's get started with High School Girl. High School Girl was my very first Red Hot Go, and it wound up making a very decent first impression. Lacking self-control, I finished the first season before I had even recorded the video. The temptation to change the script following that binge is what led to creating a rule that I had to publish the Red Hot Go before I watched anything beyond those first 3 episodes. In the video, I spoke about games being a form of escapism. As the story continued, it explored the concept more thoroughly, showcasing both positive and negative aspects to that escapism. In a story like this, you'd imagine that the narrative would pressure the main character to distance themselves from games and grow up. But High School Girl acknowledges that one is not necessary to achieve the other. The growth of the main character never involves giving up games, but rather re-evaluating his priorities. As a mid-20s gamer, that's a message I can get behind. High School Girl started with a score of boiling, but for its loving portrayal of the positive aspects of video games and how they better people's lives, I upgrade that rating to Red Hot. Kaguya-sama, Lover's War. I started Red Hot Go with 2 goals in mind. To have a formula that I could execute quickly, allowing me more time to work on analysis videos, and to increase my media input to discover new favourites. The Red Hot Go for Lover's War accomplished both goals, as it is now one of my favourite shows of all time, and I likely wouldn't have given it a chance had I not wanted to make a Red Hot Go for it. In the video, I said I wanted 2 things: less dialogue-based exposition and more moments of self-awareness. And the show delivers in both respects. Following introductions, the narrator only appeared to ham up exchanges between characters, and as the show goes on, both Shinomiya and Shirogane let their feelings evolve and reveal to the audience why they are reluctant to confess in the first place. I would have rated Lover's War red hot at the time, and if season 3 is as good as the manga suggests it will be, I might just need a higher rating. Pokemon. Pokemon was the first show on Red Hot Go that I decided to drop, not because it was boring or poorly made, but because I couldn't wrap my head around how much more there was. I wound up watching 3 more episodes after the Red Hot Go went live, and I had a good time doing so. but I ultimately stopped when it was time to watch the next show and I never picked it back up again. I would rate Pokemon as boiling and recommend it to anyone who is interested in older anime or who aren't intimidated by long-running series. I must repeat, I did not drop this show because it failed to entertain, which makes a controversial segue to the next show. Rascal does not dream of a bunny girl senpai. The Red Hot Go video for Bunny Girl Senpai was nerve-wracking to create and upload, as it was the first predominantly negative video I had ever made for my channel. Still, I had to be honest to my experience. And my experience with Bunny Girl Senpai was tiring. The show was boring, not because it was too mature for me, but because it was emotionless, pretentious, and sometimes downright incoherent. It was the flat acting in particular, the vain and childish attempt to appear like a show for grown-ups that made this anime so tedious. I rate the show ice cold and now I never have to think about it again. Hyouka. I was wrong about the lost uncle being the penultimate mystery of the show. That was an assumption I made based on my understanding of modern anime tropes, but eventually I came to realise that once the main cast solved the mystery behind the anthology Hyouka, her uncle was never brought up again. Speaking of which, the scene in which they solved that mystery is so well executed. It was dramatic, emotional, satisfying, and I would recommend that you pick up the show just so that you can experience that revelation. The episode-length mysteries I love so much eventually became huge arc-spanning mysteries, some of which took 4 or 5 episodes to play out. I never got to experience figuring out the answer for myself again. Most of the time I just had no idea what was going on until the protagonist put the pieces together. I'm not sure if that was the mystery writing getting worse or just my frame of mind while watching. Single episode length mysteries did make a comeback towards the end of the show, but that leads me to my biggest gripe: the ending. I understand that some anime only exist to sell manga, and Hyouka appears to be one of those cases, but the final episode was so anticlimactic, hosting the dullest mystery of the show and featuring all our main characters in an ambiguous state. I rate this show chilly. If I ever do decide to rewatch Hyouka, I will likely watch until the Hanging Man mystery, and then stop. My youth romantic comedy is wrong as I expected. After doing the Red Hot Go for MYR, I watched a fair few episodes, and they were even alright. A conflict between the core characters meant that there were no more dull scenes between Hachiman and Yukino, so the show addressed my primary complaint, and I was able to watch along as Yui and the other students did their thing. It even somewhat explored the protagonist's isolation, and his insight as a loner actually contributed to the story, which was interesting to see. It is a show that I wound up dropping, but not for any particular reason. I just kind of stopped watching and forgot about it until it was time to write this script. A soft drop, if you will. So despite not being as painful to watch as something like Bunny Girl Senpai, it still didn't hold my interest. I would have rated it lukewarm, and I don't think it ever managed to change my mind. Railgun. The Red Hot Go for Railgun was somewhat desperate. I'd given ambiguous or negative verdicts 3 times in a row by then, and I was worried that the audience would get as exhausted by the negativity as I had become. I was so desperate to cover something I liked again that I honestly considered scrapping the Railgun script and trying a different show. However, I stuck to my guns and released the video regardless. Despite the criticisms I made against Railgun, I still think I went too easy on it. But I'm about to make up for that. On the night that I uploaded the Red Hot Go, I sat down to watch episode 4. Halfway through, I realised that I was so bored that I would rather watch anything else. Since the dodgy morals and Kuroko's obsessive behaviour ensured that I had no goodwill towards the show at that point, I stopped watching, and I haven't thought about it since. I rated it lukewarm at the time, but throughout half an episode that rating plummeted to ice cold. The Promised Neverland. The Promised Neverland was a much-needed breath of fresh air. It expertly created tension and intrigue throughout its run, and you were never quite sure what was going to happen next. I completed this show and loved every moment of it. I don't want to say much more for fear of spoiling it for anyone who hasn't seen it yet, so all I'll say is that this show retains its red hot rating, and I highly recommend that you watch it. Mob Psycho 100. I was wrong in regards to the first season being about Mob's social development in general, but it did focus on some key relationships, which was interesting to see. One aspect of the show that surprised me was Reagan. I assumed from the first 3 episodes that he was simply a selfish person using Mob for his own ends. While that is true to an extent, it became clear later in the show that he does genuinely care about Mob and his emotional well-being. One small part of the show that stood out to me was just how protective of Mob the Body Improvement Club is. It showed that even though he was socially incompetent, the fact that he was trying to better himself was enough for people to respect him, and I like that as a message. The show was rated red hot and that rating has not changed. I'll probably get around to watching the next season eventually, but if you want me to get to it sooner, you could always suggest the second season for a red hot go. Wink wink, nudge nudge. Pet Girl of Sakurasou. Pet Girl of Sakurasou is an average show. It consistently gets bogged down with pervy anime crap and deviates from what makes it great to focus on its lesser elements. We didn't need a love triangle, or a bureaucratic conspiracy, or the vapid erotica that was included merely for fan service. But I'm only banging on about the ways this show fails because it distracts from the aspect it got so right. In my video, I talked about the theme of passion, and it was an omnipresent theme throughout the entire show. We do see Sarita find his passion, but then learn to deal with the pain that passion can bring. We see Nanami destroy her physical health in pursuit of her dreams, and how her determination became detrimental. We see the disparity of skill between Mashiro and the main character, as well as the social rift it creates. We see the core characters despair when they believe that the pursuit of their goals is over, and they are ready to resign themselves to a life of emotional mediocrity. Like I said in the original video, you don't often see anime where a student struggles with passion, and Pet Girl of Sakurasou goes all in and explores every facet of that idea. As impressed as I am with how the show managed its core themes, I still rate it as lukewarm since it had a lot of garbage that distracted from them. Your Lie in April. Unbeknownst to me when I made this video, Your Lie in April is considered a masterpiece that is essential viewing for any anime fan, and by the end of the first season I could certainly see why this is the case. Kosei's journey was engaging, Kaori's story was emotional, and the intricate detail put into the performance animations were downright breathtaking and just exuded a passion for music. However, there is one part of the show that I simply cannot overlook. Beyond the first 3 episodes, we see more extreme instances of nasty behaviour that Kosei faced at the hands of his mother. However, towards the middle of the first season, we get an arc about her. This arc seemingly wants us as an audience to say, I get it now. She was only mean because she cared so much. And frankly, that's disgraceful. Regardless of her motivation, Kosei's mother was a nasty, manipulative abuser, and the fact that this show tries to sell the narrative that it all came from a place of love is downright disgusting. Perhaps because of this, Your Lie in April just didn't have as profound an effect on me as it seems to have had on other people. I rated this show as lukewarm, and despite the disgust I feel over the handling of Kosei's mother, there is still enough good stuff here to keep that rating from going down. Quintessential Quintuplets. I said at the end of my Quintessential Quintuplets video that it had 1 or 2 more episodes to draw me in, and I'll be damned if it didn't get close to doing so. Episodes 4 and 5 make the implication that Futaro will eventually become a part of their family dynamic, and that's a mighty fine premise for a story, one that I would even be excited to watch. So what made me drop the show after episode 5? Harem garbage, of course. The never-ending stream of accidental groping, unconsenting proximity, and contrived scenarios that only ever happen in harem anime. As I said in the Red Hot Go, Quintessential Quintuplets knows precisely what kind of show it wants to be, and I'm just not into it. My rating for the show started as chilly and stays there. It would have been ice cold if not for the genuinely delightful moments sprinkled in among the generic harem trash. K-On! Of all the shows I have discussed so far, my feelings towards K-On! Are the most baffling. Looking at it as objectively as I can, it's not all that good. The easy outs I complained about in my original video are all over the broader narrative, and you never really notice any organic change within the core characters. K-On! Has a real aversion to confrontation. It sidesteps most of its conflict without much effort on behalf of the characters, and there are no lasting consequences. As a result, I nearly soft-dropped the show a few times. However, the baffling part comes with the fact that I enjoyed the show despite the lack of real conflict. I'd say that it comes down to nostalgia for the serene dynamic between the core characters. It may be dull from a narrative standpoint, but the fact of the matter is that a lot of our friend groups are like this, and I think that cozy reflection of reality is what draws people to K-On! It would be nice if they hadn't copped out on most of the show's conflicts, or if we could have seen some better character development, but I suppose in this world, those things just work themselves out, and who am I to deride a show where everything is just nice? I rated this show boiling, but since it didn't meet the potential that the first 3 episodes suggested, that rating has gone down to lukewarm. Maybe the show will click for me if I get around to watching season 2. Let me know in the comments if you'd like me to cover that in another Red Hot Go. Tonikawa, Over the Moon for You. Having watched 12 episodes of Tonikawa, I can safely say that my Red Hot Go was way off the mark. I both overestimated and underestimated its quality in the video, and I'd like to take a moment to correct the misinterpretations I made. For starters, my concerns over a love triangle and generic teen angst were unnecessary. The former only comes up once and is swiftly dealt with, while the latter doesn't amount to anything. My speculation on a character arc for Nasa, or an exploration of the theme that his name represents, also amounts to nothing. Nasa loses all of the arrogance that made him enjoyable after the accident, and the idea of achieving impossible feats never comes up again. We don't even really learn much about who Tsukasa is, where she came from, why she waited so long to find Nasa, or why she was so keen to get married in the first place. So if this isn't a show about an arrogant Nasa becoming a better person, or a mysterious Tsukasa becoming less a mystery, then what is the purpose of this anime? Well, ultimately, it's a pure slice of life between two people who got married without knowing each other. They eat meals together, create memories, and navigate regular relationship milestones. Despite some side characters adding a bit of spice, it's all rather mundane. The show is undoubtedly delightful, but in a fairy floss kind of way. It's colourful and sweet and nice to consume, but there isn't anything to bite into, no substance or any reason to recall it once you've finished. Given that it didn't fall into the usual trappings of other romance anime and made up for the lack of character development with cute scenes, I had half a mind to bump the rating up, but I'm not going to. Because Tsukasa is still only 16 and there is absolutely no reason that she couldn't have been Nasa's age, so this show retains its rating of lukewarm. Rent-A-Girlfriend. My hope that the harem garbage would dissipate over the story did not come to fruition. Also, the ending annoyed the hell out of me. Right before the credits, something happens. A declaration is made that could have potentially changed everything. And then as soon as the credits are over, the show bails and takes back the declaration. It screams that the writer wanted a big climactic moment to end the series on, but didn't want to commit to the consequences of that climax. It's a dumb cop-out that left a dreadfully sour taste in my mouth. However, the show did manage to ease my other concerns. At no point does the narrative degrade those in the escort industry, and Mami has just enough nuance to avoid the all exes are crazy trope. It also takes a somewhat grounded look into what a failed love life can look like, the devastating effect it can have on people, and even why the escort industry can be beneficial to them. But when I look back at my time watching Rent-A-Girlfriend, the thing I remember most is just how confronting it was. Now, I'm confident that no one intended for this show to be confronting, however, there is one aspect in particular that spoke to me in a very personal way, and that is Kazuya's infatuation with Mami. Every facet of my logical mind tells me that Kazuya getting back together with Mami would be a mistake. She's conniving, mean, manipulative, and Kazuya's feelings for her come across as more obsessive than loving. But knowing that didn't change the fact that I wanted to see them get back together. That says something about me. It shows that I'm still carrying some personal baggage that I was convinced I had left behind some years ago. No other anime mentioned in this video has ever exposed such a sad reflection of myself, so I have to give Rent-A-Girlfriend props for doing so. Had the show been a little lighter on the pervy harem garbage and not resorted to a cop-out ending, I would have rated it red hot, but since it did those things, the rating remains boiling. Golden Time. Where do I even start with Golden Time? Well, it has the most vapid, useless OPs of any shows in this video. I mean, the first OP amounts to Coco looking infatuated, and the second OP amounts to Coco looking sad. I suppose the second OP's song would make an intense Beat Saber level, but that's hardly praiseworthy. As the OP suggested, this show does involve a romantic relationship between Coco and Banri. While they are undoubtedly cute together at times, and I'm glad that they get together within the first half of the show, I cannot for the life of me tell you what Banri ever saw in Coco. All he knows about her at the time he asks her out is that she's dangerously obsessive. Speaking of which, that aspect of her character is never explicitly addressed. The obsession is toned down as the show continues, but at no point is it directly called out, challenged, or reflected upon. In some ways, other characters even treat it as admirable behaviour, which is a big yikes from me. Fans of the show are probably dreading a low rating, but despite those gripes, I immensely enjoyed Golden Time. All of the side characters I mentioned in my video got some kind of arc or faced some kind of conflict. Once Mitsuo is free of Coco, he struggles in his other romantic endeavours. While 2D-kun doesn't have much growth, I was surprised to see him become a larger part of the story. I was so sure that he was an occasional background character that I didn't even mention him in the Red Hot Go. Linda's role in the story is spectacular. I enjoyed every second that she was on screen. The only shortfall of the show when it comes to side characters is Chinami. While she does get a pretty decent character arc, it never really concludes, which is a bit of a shame. As for the core theme I speculated on in the Red Hot Go, the show didn't explore Coco's sense of self very much, beyond having her admit that she can be annoying or intense. However, the conflict that Banri hinted at did become the central conflict of the show. The idea that Banri is another person following the accident is thoroughly explored and eventually affects every other facet of the show. The other major part of the story is the relationship between Banri and Coco, and I think that the narrative pulled it off rather well. They get into some pretty severe arguments and doubt their worth to each other, but the ways they navigate these tense moments are always heartfelt. While as a whole, Golden Time isn't better than Toradora, the relationship between Banri and Coco is certainly more nuanced than that between Ryuji and Tiger. So despite not exploring all the themes I hoped it would and having the worst OPs of all the anime I am covering, the show is fantastic. With the way it arranged the pieces it made in those first few episodes, I gladly upgrade Golden Time's rating from boiling to red hot. If you're a fan of Toradora or romance in general, I highly recommend giving this one a watch. Charlotte. My biggest wish for Charlotte following the first 3 episodes was that I could watch Yu suffer for being an intolerable dirtbag. To see him brought down a peg and realise that he is not the centre of the universe. The show provided this beatdown so well that I wound up feeling kinda sorry for him. The tone of the show takes a dramatic shift at the halfway point. One of those tonal shifts that has you sit there with your jaw agape for a moment while you process what has just happened. And while that tonal shift isn't permanent, it does keep things bleak for longer than I would have expected. As a result, we do see Yu transform from a selfish abuser of his abilities to someone who is selfless to an almost self-destructive degree. You see him get to know the fellow student council members and come to respect them as peers and see them respect him in kind. Throughout this show, Yu changed from a character who I loved to hate to someone that I just loved in general. In my original video, I said that Charlotte was about how a traditional society would exploit those with powers. Well, Sammy said it, but I wrote it into the script. As the show continues, the narrative takes this idea one step further. The ultimate message of Charlotte seems to be that superpowers are detrimental to everyone, to the powered individuals, to the people around them, and society at large. Now, Charlotte is hardly the first piece of superhero media to make this claim, but it may be the first to go all in the way it does. What do I mean by that? Well, you'll just have to watch the show to find out. Charlotte retains its red hot rating, and it is another show that I highly recommend you watch. To finish this video, I thought it would be fun to rank every anime I've watched for Red Hot Go this year. From my least to most favourite, Bunny Girl Senpai, Railgun, Hyouka, My Youth Romantic Comedy, Quintessential Quintuplets, K-On!, Pokemon, Your Lie in April, Pet Girl of Sakurasou, Rent a Girlfriend, Tonikawa, Golden Time, High School Girl, Charlotte, Mob Psycho 100, Promised Neverland, and my favourite of 2020 is of course Kaguya-sama Love is War. I'd like to thank my patrons, Lars Espen, Data52, Geman5, Pixcalibur, Jeremy Pashik, Fireclaw, Swiss Cage, Gerald, Dustin Rubin, The Blue Crystal 770, and Garen. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you next time.